Part 1. Birthday Shock and Betrayal. The morning sunlight poured through the blinds, falling across my small kitchen table where I had meticulously laid out the perfect birthday breakfast. Coffee, freshly brewed, toast, lightly buttered, a small vase with daisies I had picked from the garden yesterday. I had imagined this morning hundreds of times, quiet, warm, a family gathered around me, laughter and light filling the room. Today was my 30th birthday. Grandma appeared in the doorway, her eyes twinkling as she handed me an envelope. I smiled, thinking it might be a card, a note, a simple gesture. Instead, I found a check. $5 million. My hands trembled, the paper feeling impossibly heavy in my grasp. 5 million. My mind raced. I whispered, "Thank you." I don't know what to say. The excitement surged through me. This was more than I had ever imagined. Then, in the next heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. My husband's parents, standing behind me, reached forward and tore the check into two halves. The edges curled and crumpled, falling to the floor like the remnants of my trust. I froze. The air turned cold. Their eyes were not angry. They were precise, deliberate, calculating. They had wanted to prevent me from having this gift. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I held the torn pieces, staring at them quietly, feeling the weight of betrayal settle deep into my chest. It was a silent moment, a pause that stretched on, the sound of the check tearing still echoing in my mind. The rest of the family chatter, the laughter, the small birthday greetings, they all felt distant, like they belonged to another world. Later, the phone rang. The bank. The voice of the director was calm, polite, but urgent. "Ma'am, we verified the funds. They were legally deposited electronically before any interference occurred. Please come in to finalize the paperwork." I exhaled slowly. The legal confirmation, the knowledge that this was mine by every right, sparked a small flame of control amidst the chaos. I spent the afternoon in quiet contemplation. My coffee had gone cold. I stared out the window, imagining the river beyond the trees. Betrayal cuts deep, but knowledge is a tool, and patience is a weapon. I was already thinking ahead, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with quiet determination. The day had been stolen from me, but the future I would reclaim on my terms. Part 2. Quiet reflection and growing suspicion. The morning passed in a muted haze. I moved through the house almost automatically, each action deliberate but mechanical. I set the table with the remnants of breakfast, cleared the dishes, and rinsed the coffee cups, letting the warm water run over my hands as if it could wash away the shock lingering in my chest. The check, torn in half, remained on the counter, a silent accusation that I could not ignore. I walked from room to room, observing the details that I had once overlooked. The sun cast shadows along the floorboards, and I noticed the subtle glances exchanged between my husband's parents. Their calm, composed faces were deceptive. The eyes betrayed a flicker of satisfaction, a hint that they had believed their plan would succeed. I felt a mixture of anger and disbelief, but I reminded myself, patience first, reaction later. Sitting by the window with a cup of tea, I let my mind wander through the events leading up to this moment. Each memory was a puzzle piece. The small favors they had requested over the years, the subtle nudges toward dependence, the quiet assertions of control masked as concern. It all made sense now. They had tested my limits, and in tearing that check, they had assumed they had won. But I realized, in that quiet moment, that knowledge was power. I had proof of the deposit, a legal claim that could not be refuted, and the understanding of how they operated. Every gesture, every word, every expression had been cataloged in my mind. I could see the threads of manipulation, and I began to envision the ways I might reclaim control. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through careful, deliberate action. I made a mental list of the steps I would take, confirm the funds, document the events, and begin preparing my own path forward. Each step was precise, each thought measured. The betrayal had happened, but it would not define the course of my life. Instead, it became the catalyst for clarity, a reason to move with purpose rather than panic. By the time the afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor, I had formed a quiet resolve. They believed they had stripped me of opportunity and dignity. What they did not see, what they could not measure, was the quiet fire building within me, a readiness to act, not recklessly, but with intelligence and composure. Today had taken from me what was immediate, but tomorrow, I decided, would be mine to reclaim. Part 3. Discovery and legal preparation. The next morning, I woke with a strange mixture of resolve and disbelief. The previous day's events, the check, the betrayal, the cold calculation of my in-laws, still lingered like a shadow. But beneath the anger, a seed of clarity had begun to grow. I understood now that their actions, cruel as they were, had inadvertently exposed a vulnerability I could exploit. The law was on my side. I sat at the kitchen table, the torn checks spread out in front of me. I held the pieces, turning them over, noticing details I hadn't before. The faded ink, the faint creases, evidence of the journey this paper had taken before being shredded. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank, asking for the records, the electronic deposit confirmations, any documentation that could solidify my claim. The bank representative, polite but firm, confirmed what I had suspected. The funds had indeed been deposited before any interference. All of it is in your account, Mrs. Harrison. Legally, it's yours. We can provide the full paper trail, she said. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of that knowledge settle. For the first time since the check was torn, I felt a glimmer of control. I began organizing the paperwork methodically. Receipts, statements, emails, confirmations, all stacked neatly in a folder labeled Evidence, Birthday Funds. Each sheet felt like armor, each signature a shield against their manipulation. I realized that the betrayal I had suffered could be transformed into a strategic advantage. The law would be my tool, patience my weapon. Then came the quiet planning. I needed a strategy, a sequence of actions that would allow me to reclaim not just the money, but my dignity and independence. I could confront them outright. But no, that would play into their expectations. They wanted a reaction, a display of desperation or fear. I would not give them that. Instead, I would act deliberately, letting them reveal themselves further while I strengthened my position. I made a list in my mind, every step precise. First, secure all records and legal confirmations. Second, speak with a trusted financial advisor to ensure the funds were fully protected. Third, create a plan for potential confrontations, both at home and in any family gatherings. Each step felt deliberate, almost cinematic, like moving chess pieces across a board where the stakes were not just money, but trust, respect, and autonomy. By the afternoon, the quiet resolve had transformed into action. I called my lawyer, Mr. Patterson, explaining the situation calmly, clearly, without embellishment. It's more than just a check, I said. It's evidence of their intent to manipulate and deprive me of what's mine. I need guidance on securing the funds and ensuring my rights are protected. He listened, took notes, and promised a thorough review. I hung up the phone feeling lighter, yet more focused than ever. The betrayal had been painful, but the awareness of what was legally mine, combined with the methodical preparation ahead, gave me a sense of empowerment I had not felt in years. As evening approached, I looked out over the garden, the flowers bathed in the soft glow of late sunlight. I realized that the check, torn though it was, had ignited a determination I had never known. Betrayal could not be undone, but opportunity had been revealed. And I would take it, quietly, decisively, and with complete control over my future. Part 4. Legal moves and strategic planning. The following morning, I awoke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The check, torn though it was, had sparked a clarity that pushed aside lingering shock and grief. I knew what needed to happen next. I had to secure my claim legally, ensure no one could challenge it, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation with my husband's parents. I began with the bank. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and paper, an ordinary backdrop for extraordinary events. I presented my identification, copies of the electronic deposit confirmation, and the torn check. The banker nodded, taking notes meticulously, confirming that the funds were mine, fully protected, and legally untouchable. Every signature, every line of the deposit record was a small victory, proof that no deception could stand against the law. From there, I called my lawyer, Mr. Patterson. Calmly, deliberately, I outlined everything. The check, the shredding, the electronic deposit, and the background of manipulation. This is about more than money, I explained. It's about securing my rights and ensuring that any future interference can be countered immediately. He listened, eyes narrowing slightly behind his glasses, and promised to draft a detailed action plan. Returning home, I sat at my desk with a notebook and pen, mapping out each potential encounter with my in-laws. Every family dinner, every casual gathering, every conversation where they might try to undermine me was listed with contingencies. I planned what I would say, what documents I would show, and, crucially, how I would maintain calm and composure. Their expectation was that I would panic, that I would become emotional. I would give them nothing. I reviewed the past months in my mind, recalling subtle patterns, small requests disguised as concern, casual comments that implied dependence, moments where they sought to control my choices. Each instance was now a thread in a web I could navigate with precision. I realized that confrontation would be effective only if I had patience, information, and authority on my side. By evening, I had set a schedule, meet with the bank and lawyer, organize all records, and quietly communicate with my son to ensure he understood the situation without escalating tension. I wasn't acting out of vengeance. I was acting to reclaim autonomy, dignity, and control. The next encounter would not be a heated argument. It would be a display of calm mastery. As I sipped tea and watched the sun dip behind the trees, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The day had begun in betrayal and uncertainty. But now, armed with documentation, strategy, and the law itself, I felt the first stirrings of power. The check, the torn paper, and their audacity had inadvertently given me the tools to rise above them. Tomorrow, I would begin the next phase, measured, confident, and unshakable. Part 5, Legal Actions and Gaining Control. The next few days became a carefully orchestrated rhythm. Each morning, I checked in with the bank to ensure that every transaction was secure and properly documented. I requested copies of all electronic confirmations, creating a complete paper trail. Each document felt like a small victory, a tangible proof that no one could dispute my rights. The law was now firmly on my side, and the clarity this brought allowed me to move with confidence. I met again with Mr. Patterson, my lawyer, discussing contingencies and potential scenarios. He advised me on safeguarding the funds, ensuring that my accounts were protected against any interference, and even drafting letters in case my in-laws attempted to challenge me. Every suggestion strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing, planning, and taking control. At home, I began practicing subtle ways to assert authority in family interactions. During lunch, I would casually reference meetings with the bank, without giving details, letting my husband's parents sense that I was informed and vigilant. A small remark here, a composed expression there. It was psychological positioning. They could no longer assume I was naive or compliant. Their confidence began to falter, the careful facade showing cracks. I also started quietly managing the funds, moving portions into secure accounts, exploring safe investments, and reviewing each decision with precision. Every financial choice was deliberate, reinforcing my independence. The knowledge that I could handle the money responsibly and legally added a layer of authority that could not be challenged. By the time the next family gathering arrived, I had transformed. Calm, composed, and quietly confident, I entered the room, carrying myself with the poise of someone who knew her power. My in-laws, who had assumed I would react emotionally, were unsettled. They tried subtle jabs, offhand comments about responsibility and generosity, but I responded with gentle, measured answers, never revealing the depth of my preparation. For the first time, I noticed the shift. They were watching me, uncertain, calculating their words. The dynamic had changed. I wasn't just a passive observer in my own life. I had reclaimed authority. Every smile, every nod, every casual mention of a meeting or plan was a reminder that I was fully capable, fully in control. The betrayal had given me awareness, and awareness had become power. Part 6. Direct confrontation and rising tension. The next family gathering was set in the spacious dining room, the air warm with the aroma of roasted chicken and baked bread. I entered deliberately, each step measured, each gesture calm. My husband's parents looked up from their preparations, expecting hesitation, anxiety, perhaps even tears. They were met instead with poise, a quiet confidence that radiated from me. I greeted everyone with a smile, soft but intentional, acknowledging their presence without deference. Conversation flowed around the table, but I subtly guided topics, referencing recent bank appointments and legal consultations without revealing the depth of my knowledge. Their glances betrayed unease. They were testing me, trying to gauge whether I had been broken by their actions. I had not. When a comment slipped, a veiled remark about responsibility, "It's not easy managing such sums," I responded calmly. "Fortunately, I have proper guidance and all matters are well documented." The pause that followed spoke louder than any words. My in-laws were caught off guard, realizing that their assumptions had been incorrect. Their attempt to unsettle me had failed. I introduced the topic of the checks subtly, without accusation, recounting the events with precision. The gift, the shredding, the bank confirmation. I watched as their composure wavered. I did not need to raise my voice. The truth itself was enough. Each statement, each pause, each calm glance reinforced my authority, highlighting their misjudgment and the inevitability of their defeat in this quiet battle. Throughout dinner, I maintained the balance of civility and dominance. I controlled the narrative with gentle authority, guiding conversation while revealing just enough to signal that I was informed, prepared, and unshakable. My husband noticed the subtle shift, and I could see a mixture of relief and admiration in his eyes. I had reclaimed not only my legal rights, but also my presence and influence within the family. By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere had shifted. The subtle tension hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. I had taken the first decisive steps in asserting control, converting previous betrayal into leverage. They had underestimated me, and now, quietly, deliberately, I had begun to rewrite the rules of engagement. The torn check had set the stage, but my actions, calm, calculated, unyielding, had turned that betrayal into an instrument of power. I left the evening with a sense of satisfaction. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. Quiet authority had spoken volumes. The battle was ongoing, but I had won the first round. The law, preparation, and self-possession were on my side. The next phase of this family saga would be mine to direct. Part 7. Consolidating power and legal clarity. The days that followed were a careful dance, each movement deliberate, each word measured. I had begun to notice subtle shifts in the household. Small hesitations when my husband's parents spoke, the way they paused mid-sentence as if weighing their words. The quiet authority I had cultivated was working. They were beginning to recognize that I was no longer a passive participant, that I possessed both knowledge and the means to assert it. I spent mornings reviewing every document, making sure each transaction, each confirmation, was neatly organized and easily accessible. The legal groundwork was solid. With Mr. Patterson's guidance, I prepared formal letters in advance, outlining my rights and detailing the events of that fateful birthday. I did not plan to send them recklessly. They were tools of leverage, reminders that the law supported me, and that any attempt to interfere would meet consequences. In family interactions, I became observant and precise. During dinners, casual conversations, and even brief encounters in the hallway, I carefully selected my words, often referencing meetings or appointments that suggested vigilance and preparation without revealing specifics. The change in their demeanor was noticeable. My husband noticed it too, a mix of respect, cautious admiration, and relief. The dynamic was shifting, and I was at the center of it. A small, private smile became my signature. Every question they asked, every subtle challenge they posed, was met with calm, informed responses. I didn't need to escalate. The power was in my restraint, my composure, my ability to let their assumptions crumble in the presence of my quiet confidence. Meanwhile, I managed the funds carefully, moving portions into secure accounts, consulting with financial experts, and exploring low-risk investments. Each decision was deliberate, reinforcing my independence and establishing credibility. I was no longer simply reacting to past betrayal. I was actively shaping my future, strengthening my position, and gaining influence within the family through competence and preparation. By the weekend, I had a clear picture of the next steps. Continue documenting interactions, assert my legal rights discreetly when necessary, and subtly remind my husband's parents that I was fully informed. Every measured action was a step in reclaiming authority, converting the shock of betrayal into sustained power. I had transformed from a target of manipulation into a force of controlled influence. and every encounter further cemented my place. The check that had been torn, the humiliation of their early attempt to undermine me, had become the foundation for strategy. Each calm action, each meticulous record, each measured conversation was part of a larger plan, a plan in which I was no longer vulnerable, but fully empowered. The family had underestimated me, and now, quietly, deliberately, I was reclaiming every ounce of control. Part 8. Legal climax and confrontation. The tension had been building for weeks, and by the time the next formal family dinner arrived, I was ready to move decisively. I walked into the dining room with a calm, controlled energy, aware of every eye on me. My husband's parents shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing that the quiet authority I had cultivated over the past weeks was now about to become active power. I began by subtly referencing recent consultations with my lawyer and bank, not as threats, but as statements of fact. "I've reviewed all the documentation with Mr. Patterson," I said, placing my hands lightly on the table. "Every transaction, every confirmation is fully verified. The funds are secure and legally mine." There was a pause, a silence that stretched across the room. I watched as their expressions flickered between surprise, unease, and calculation. Then, carefully, I laid out the chronology of events: the birthday check, their attempt to destroy it, and the subsequent legal confirmation from the bank. I described each step precisely, calmly, letting the facts speak for themselves. The impact was immediate. Their small gestures of superiority, the subtle attempts to assert control, began to crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. My husband noticed the shift too. He looked at me with a mixture of relief and pride, recognizing that I was no longer the person to be manipulated. My in-laws, meanwhile, tried to interject, to twist the conversation, but I remained composed. I responded to each comment with gentle, firm clarity, never raising my voice, never showing irritation. The law, preparation, and confidence were my allies, and their attempts at intimidation failed against them. Throughout the evening, I maintained control of the narrative. I didn't need dramatics or confrontations. Quiet dominance was far more effective. Subtle references to meetings, documentation, and consultations reminded them that I had anticipated their moves, and any further attempts to undermine me would be fruitless. Each response, each deliberate smile, reinforced my position. By dessert, the power dynamic had shifted completely. I had reclaimed authority, not just legally, but socially within the family. The torn check, once a symbol of betrayal, had become a tool of leverage. My in-laws understood, perhaps for the first time, that I was no longer to be underestimated. Calmly, methodically, I had turned their aggression into my advantage, and the stage was now set for the final steps in reclaiming full control of my life and my inheritance. Part 9. Maximizing family authority and preparing. The final confrontation. Weeks had passed since the birthday incident, but each day had been a lesson in strategy, observation, and subtle influence. The initial shock of betrayal had long faded, replaced by a measured, quiet authority that I wielded with precision. I knew that to secure my place fully within the family, I had to expand my influence, assert control over conversations, and subtly remind everyone that I was now fully informed and prepared. At every family gathering, I took deliberate note of interactions, remembering who said what, which comments were attempts to undermine, and which gestures hinted at resentment or envy. My husband's parents were careful, but the carefulness itself was evidence. They had learned that I was no longer easily intimidated. Each casual remark about responsibility or generosity was met with calm, factual responses, never revealing the depth of preparation behind them. Their small power plays faltered under the weight of my composed demeanor. Simultaneously, I strengthened my legal and financial position. Additional meetings with the bank ensured my accounts were secure, while discussions with Mr. Patterson resulted in formal letters that quietly established my rights in writing. I also reviewed investment strategies, moving portions of the funds into low-risk, high-security vehicles. Each action reinforced not only my financial independence, but also my perceived authority within the family. The next gathering was more than a dinner. It was a test of influence. I entered with calm confidence, greeting everyone warmly, but with a subtle hint of control. I referenced meetings, bank confirmations, and careful planning in passing, signaling to the room that I had anticipated any challenges. My husband watched, quietly admiring the transformation. My in-laws exchanged glances, their earlier confidence now tinged with caution, realizing they could no longer manipulate or intimidate me. I also began small, controlled demonstrations of leadership, suggesting minor changes to family routines, guiding conversations toward productive topics, and subtly mediating disputes. All of it reinforced my position. I did not need to dominate vocally. Authority was established through presence, intelligence, and restraint. Their attempts to provoke or undermine me were met with calm, unwavering clarity. By the evening's end, the power dynamic had shifted completely. I had taken control without conflict, quietly turning the family's assumptions upside down. I had converted betrayal into leverage, uncertainty into authority. Every casual smile, every measured remark, and every precise action built toward the moment I had been preparing for, the final confrontation, where I would secure full recognition of my rights, my independence, and my dignity. I left the gathering with a sense of satisfaction. They knew, finally, that the quiet woman they once underestimated was now a force to be reckoned with. My influence had grown, my strategy was in place, and the stage was set for the climactic resolution. The torn check, once a symbol of humiliation and betrayal, had become the catalyst for empowerment, strategy, and complete control. Part 10. The final confrontation. The evening arrived, and with it, a sense of inevitability. I knew that tonight would mark the culmination of weeks of planning, observation, and careful maneuvering. My husband's parents, previously confident and calculating, were noticeably tense as I entered the room. Their small gestures of dominance, once so effective, now seemed fragile, tentative. I had turned the quiet authority I had built into palpable power, and tonight would solidify it. I began the conversation with calm precision, recounting the sequence of events that had brought us here, the birthday check, their attempt to destroy it, and the subsequent confirmation from the bank verifying that the funds were legally and rightfully mine. I spoke without anger, without accusation, letting the facts speak. Each detail was deliberate, each pause measured. The weight of truth hung in the air, and I could see it press upon them. As I spoke, their reactions shifted. The casual smirks and confident gestures dissolved into unease. Glances exchanged between them revealing doubt. My husband, quietly observing, gave me a small nod, recognition that the woman they once underestimated had fully reclaimed control. The room, once a stage for their manipulation, had become a testament to my authority. I then outlined the steps I had taken to secure the funds, meetings with the bank, consultations with my lawyer, and careful documentation of every interaction. I explained that any attempt to interfere further would be met with formal action, not out of malice, but out of necessity. My voice remained steady, calm, and authoritative. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the shift as the reality of my preparedness sank in. Breathe by breath, I maintained control, guiding the conversation while letting them realize the futility of their previous tactics. Their attempts to interject or intimidate were met with unwavering composure, a quiet confidence that made them hesitate, rethink, and ultimately, respect the boundaries I had established. By the end of the evening, the transformation was undeniable. I had asserted my legal and moral authority without raising my voice, without creating conflict, and yet with complete effectiveness. The torn check, once a symbol of betrayal, had been transformed into a tool of empowerment. My husband's parents had come to recognize, perhaps for the first time, that they could no longer dictate the terms of my life or manipulate my decisions. I had won not through confrontation, but through careful planning, unwavering calm, and absolute clarity. As I left the room, a sense of quiet triumph settled over me. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. I had reclaimed my rights, my dignity, and my influence. And in that moment, I knew the next chapters of my life would be guided by intelligence, composure, and absolute control over my own destiny. Part 11. Aftermath and long-term empowerment. The days after the final confrontation brought a quiet sense of victory. I moved through the household with a new rhythm, calm, composed, aware that every action and word now carried weight. My husband's parents were careful around me, their former attempts at manipulation subdued by the clarity of my authority. It was subtle, almost invisible, but unmistakable. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. I spent mornings reviewing the financial arrangements once more, confirming that all accounts were secure, funds properly allocated, and investments strategically placed. Every decision reinforced independence. The money, once a point of conflict, had become a tool for empowerment, allowing me to plan and act without fear or interference. It was freedom measured in concrete, practical steps, legal documentation, secure accounts, and strategic financial planning. Family interactions became exercises in quiet influence. I no longer had to assert myself overtly. A calm word, a measured glance, or a subtle suggestion was enough to guide conversations and maintain authority. My husband noticed, too. He observed the shift and quietly aligned with my measured leadership. Together, we navigated gatherings with a balance of respect and clarity, keeping the family dynamic fair but clearly structured around truth and accountability. I also began to reflect on the personal growth that had emerged from these trials. The betrayal that once hurt so deeply had taught me patience, observation, and strategy. It had forced me to identify weaknesses in others' attempts to manipulate, and in myself, it nurtured resilience and discernment. Every calculated step I took reinforced confidence and control. The authority I had reclaimed was no longer dependent on fear or confrontation. It was built on knowledge, preparation, and strategic composure. By the end of the week, I felt an undeniable sense of independence. I had transformed the check, once torn and discarded, into a symbol of empowerment. The legal protections ensured my financial security, the carefully managed accounts guaranteed long-term stability, and the subtle yet decisive influence within the family solidified my position. I no longer worried about manipulation or underestimation. I was the architect of my own life, guiding each choice with intelligence and calm authority. Even casual conversations now carried a different tone. My husband's parents spoke with measured respect, aware that I was no longer vulnerable to their schemes. And I, in turn, felt the steady confidence of someone who had faced betrayal, navigated it with precision, and emerged stronger, wiser, and fully independent. The transformation was complete. I had turned the most painful experience of my life into a foundation for autonomy and long-term authority. The lessons of strategy, calm resolve, and careful preparation had created a life where I could act decisively, control my own destiny, and maintain dignity and independence in every interaction. The check that once symbolized betrayal had become a catalyst for empowerment, shaping the woman I had become, resilient, intelligent, and unshakable. Part 12. Conclusion and moral. The days after the final confrontation were quiet, yet powerful. The house felt different now, not in its structure, but in its energy. I moved through each room with a sense of purpose and calm authority. My husband's parents no longer tried subtle manipulations or veiled comments. The respect, or at least the acknowledgement, of my position had settled over them like an unspoken law. I realized that true power is not loud or dramatic. It is consistent, deliberate, and undeniable. Reflecting on the journey, I understood that the torn check, the betrayal, and the initial shock were not just obstacles. They were catalysts. They forced me to observe, plan, and act with intention. The pain had refined me, sharpening my awareness, building resilience, and teaching the value of patience. I had learned that strength is not measured by reaction, but by preparation, calm, and the courage to stand firm when others try to undermine you. Financial independence became more than just numbers in an account. It became freedom in thought and action. Each carefully documented transaction, each strategic decision, each legal consultation reinforced my ability to act decisively and wisely. I no longer felt vulnerable or dependent on the whims of others. I was the architect of my own life, steering my future with intelligence and dignity. Within the family, authority was no longer something I had to assert through force or confrontation. It was earned through observation, strategic planning, and composure. I had turned every attempt at control by others into an opportunity to strengthen my position. The torn check, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a tool for empowerment. Each subtle conversation, each calm decision, Each moment of quiet reflection solidified my role not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a woman in control of her destiny. The moral of this story is simple yet profound. Betrayal can hurt deeply, but it can also illuminate strength you never knew you possessed. Patience, preparation, and composure are more powerful than anger or rash retaliation. By understanding the stakes, preparing diligently, and acting deliberately, we can transform the most painful experiences into opportunities for empowerment and lasting independence. As I sit by the window, watching the sun set over the garden, I feel a deep, quiet satisfaction. The journey has been difficult, but I have emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in control of my life. The lessons I have learned, the authority I have claimed, and the independence I have secured will guide me in every decision ahead. Betrayal may have started the story, but wisdom, strategy, and calm resolve have written its ending.